Now, each year, ASIO gives an annual threat assessment, and last night we received the threat assessment. Pretty scary stuff. Foreign spies using dating apps like Tinder, Bumble and Hinge to gather intelligence. I don't know what intelligence they're going to get out of a dating app. Never used one. The pandemic has been a boom time for radicalising kids as young as 13. As young as 13, there's been a surge in that, and fears they're becoming extremists. And ASIO says they frustrated this, but Australia's election, presumably the federal election, was a target for foreign governments. And they thwarted this plot by an unnamed foreign government using a person in Australia to attempt to recruit people to run for Parliament, sort of Trojan horses in a sense, get into Parliament and do their bidding. This is ASIO's Director General of Security, Mike Burgess, describing how that scheme to influence Australia's Parliament, a foreign power trying to influence a foreign power. This is how he said it worked.
The employer hired by the puppeteer began identifying candidates likely to run in the election who either supported the interests of the foreign government or who were assessed as vulnerable to inducements and cultivation. The employer used existing relationships with politicians, staffers and journalists to select potential targets.
Okay, potential targets. On the line, Senator James Paterson, Chair of the Federal Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Okay, well, we're all looking to China as carrying responsibility. Do we know?
Neil, I've got a pretty fair idea behind the culprit of this, and I'd like to be as straight as possible with you and your listeners, but it isn't up to me to reveal classified information in a live radio interview. I have said previously, though, Neil, that the principal foreign espionage and interference threat does come from the Chinese Communist Party, but it isn't the only threat. There are other foreign intelligence services who do try and influence Australia in their national interest, but against ours.
Oh, I understand. So you've been briefed on it, when you can't tell us, basically.
Yeah, it's not up to me to just say that publicly. If the ASIO Director General wants to say that, that's a matter for him, but I won't say that publicly.
No, I can understand that you're bound by that. Why not, though? Not you, but why would we not make it public at an official level? I understand that you can't hear, but why wouldn't we? Are we worried about upsetting China or Russia or whoever it is?
There's a range of considerations that go into whether or not these things should be identified. One is that ASIO, for very good reason, wants to protect its sources and its methods. Anything which would inadvertently reveal either would be hugely detrimental to the national interest. Another factor is our defamation laws in this country. It's been previously the case that people have successfully sued media outlets for accusations like these being published. And, of course, we do have to consider our relationships, international relationships, yes.
Okay. Well, how sinister is it? How dangerous is what we're talking about here?
It's very serious. The threat that Mr. Burgess described last night was a very sophisticated threat, and if it hadn't been thwarted, it could have been a very insidious influence on our political system and on our country. He said that he believed that in the future that people who'd been selected under this scheme may become under pressure to reveal Australia's secrets relating to defence, foreign affairs or trade, and that the sense of obligation might be created for these people given that they were supported into Parliament by this scheme. Now, it's possible and likely, in fact, that some of the people who were targets of this didn't even realise the ultimate source of this influence. It was masked using what we call a cutout, someone who was an intermediary who didn't appear to be linked to a foreign government, but some of them might have suspected that it sounded a little bit too good to be true, and that was really one of the main messages last night, particularly for politicians, which is if an offer seems too good to be true, it probably is, and you need to ask the questions to make sure you're not exposing yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what would an offer be, though? I mean, he talked about them working with journalists and politicians and everything. How would it work in realistic terms? Rather, they go and see Billy Bloggs and say, we can get you pre-selected, or we can help get you pre-selected.
We can make a donation to your campaign. We can ensure favourable media coverage, particularly in diaspora ethnic media outlets for your campaign, which in some seats might be a significant factor. We can help introduce you to people to work on your campaign as volunteers or people who'd be good staff for you when you get elected. It's about opening up opportunities to influence and cultivate someone once they're elected to act against Australia's national interests. So we are very lucky that this scheme was thwarted. But the ASIO Director General also did say last night that foreign interference and espionage has supplanted terrorism as our principal security concern in Australia, and that's a trend which has been evident for a number of years now.
And we would assume, I mean, this one's been thwarted, but it'll happen again, if indeed it's not already happening now.
Absolutely right, Neil. Every day, a range of foreign intelligence services are looking for opportunities to gain access to our sensitive classified information and to influence our public policy decision-making to be in their favour rather than in our national interest. They are constantly probing, constantly looking for weaknesses in our system, constantly looking for people who they can cultivate and recruit to serve their ends.
Sounds like it's a good argument to have to declare a lot more donations than we do, even in the early stages.
Yeah, donations are a point of vulnerability. I mean, it's previously been revealed in the Sam Dastyari affair that a very significant donation was offered by a Chinese businessman in the hope of influencing Labor Party policy on China, and it was at least successful in persuading Sam Dastyari to stand up beside this donor, Wang Zhongmo, and articulate the Chinese government's position on the South China Sea in contradiction of the Australian government's position on the South China Sea. So I agree that is a point of vulnerability now.
Do you know which side, or were both sides being targeted in this latest one?
Generally speaking, our adversaries are not discriminating. They look for anyone who'd be willing to serve their objectives or may be vulnerable to exploitation. So they don't tend to discriminate on a political level.
Does it just stop here, or does the Australian government, knowing which power is responsible, make some sort of statement to them and say, hang on, we're not going to cop this? Or do we just cop it?
Well, effectively, that statement was made in the House of Representatives 4 years ago by Malcolm Turnbull when he stood up and said, we're passing a new package of foreign interference and espionage legislation that's going to equip our intelligence agencies and law enforcement authorities with the ability to fight back. And he explicitly, directly referenced China when he did so. So I think it's been very clear for some time that Australia will not allow ourselves to be bullied by any foreign power, China included.
And the person behind this, the so-called puppeteer, do we know? Are they still in the country? Are they still operating? Have they been deported? What's happened?
That's a very good question, Neil. I really shouldn't go into that detail because it might inadvertently reveal the identity of the person, but safe to say that ASIO has very good coverage of these people, and they probably would have seen the speech last night and been pretty clear to them what the Director General was talking about.
Okay, and just on another issue, using dating apps, Tinder, Bumble and things like that. Now, you were a married man, as am I. You'd have no idea how they work. But how did it work? What do they do? What do they get out of the dating app?
Neil, despite my young age, I met my wife at a very young age too, so I've missed this phenomenon altogether. But essentially what they do is they are targeting people who have access to sensitive information. It might be classified, but not necessarily classified information. So if you have access to sensitive information in your line of work, and all of a sudden you get contact on a social media platform or on a dating platform that seems too good to be true. Let's be direct about this. If you're a 6 and they're a 10, it might not be your looks that they've been charmed by. It might be your access to information. And they might try and navigate you off one of those platforms onto another platform, an encrypted platform, for example, where they will try and, over time, get information out of you, which is useful for them, but which would be in violation of whatever arrangements you've entered into in your work to protect Australia's classified information.
That's sort of a sophisticated modern-age version of the honeypot, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is now. And it can take place entirely online. These people may never actually meet in person, although they can also meet in person, and it can be quite successful.
And just finally, the other thing the Director General raised was the issue of 13-year-olds being radicalised. That's just terrifying.
This is a very, very disturbing trend where younger and younger children and a larger proportion of the people of interest to ASIO and our law enforcement agencies are young children who have been exposed to abhorrent, violent material online and desensitised to it and come to believe that it is an acceptable material to consume, and therefore they're more likely to engage in those acts themselves. It's a very troubling trend. As Mike Burgess said last night, this is the whole of society problem. It's not just a security problem. And we need our schools and our parents and our families and our whole society working to divert young people from these very disturbing pathways.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for talking to us. Take care.
Roger, Neil. Thank you.
Senator James Paterson, Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. So we've got, and it's pretty clear, it's the Chinese government attempting to fiddle with our democracy and our political system by putting effective plants into the federal parliament. So we've got the Chinese government doing that. We've got heaven knows who, probably similar, Chinese or Russia, going through the dating apps to try and cull information. Has anybody ever used a dating app? Would you? How would that work? And 13-year-olds being radicalised.